Welcome to this special broadcast that we are bringing to you in collaboration with Voice of America. My name is Mohammed Saleh. The American President Joe Biden has cancelled a historic visit to Papua New Guinea, where he was to meet with leaders of several Pacific Island nations. Instead, he has chosen to focus on the crucial debt ceiling negotiations in Washington. And also what's been called off due to Joe Biden's changed travel plans is the landmark Quad Summit that was slated to be held in Sydney. The Voice of America's Jessica Stone looks at what this means for the U.S. engagement in a region at a time when China is increasingly exerting its influence.
However, I'm cutting my trip short.
President Joe Biden canceled what would have been a historic first visit by a sitting U.S. president to Papua New Guinea. His 4-hour trip was expected to bring about a new defense pact between Washington and Port Moresby that would allow the U.S. Coast Guard to patrol its waters. Biden was also to sit down with the leaders of Pacific Island nations for the first time since their visit to Washington last year. Analysts say the timing of the missed visit is unfortunate.
When you think about what the U.S. is trying to do in the Pacific Islands to show that it is engaged economically, militarily, diplomatically, and to show that it is a strategic competitor and that can provide things that the Pacific Islands needs, I think that this is a significant setback.
Obviously, it's a huge disappointment.
Daniel Russell, who served in the Obama White House during its Rebalance to Asia approach, says it's a setback that can be overcome. While Biden is not meeting his counterparts from India, Japan, and Australia in Sydney as initially planned, Russell says the group on Sunday will announce an expansion of the Indo-Pacific Maritime Domain Awareness Initiative to the Pacific Islands.
This is a game changer in what it will allow them to do by way of managing and protecting their own phenomenal maritime resources.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who had long planned his own visit to Papua New Guinea and Australia, will continue now as the central figure showing democratic commitment to the Indo-Pacific, says Sadanand Dume of the American Enterprise Institute.
If you step back and you just look at this thickening web of linkages among the democracies of the Indo-Pacific, that process is just moving inexorably forward.
Next week, that process moves to Detroit, Michigan, where 13 of the region's trade ministers are scheduled to attend a meeting of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, Washington's economic engagement effort in the region. Jessica Stone, VOA News.
All right, now to tell us more as to what all of this, of course, means, we're being joined in by Voice of America's Chris Cascio, is joining us live on this broadcast from the White House in Washington, D.C. Now, Chris, President Biden is presently in Japan at the G7 summit, where there's a dialogue about pushing back against China's economic coercion. Now, what more can you tell us as to what is being spoken at the G7 meetings then?
Good morning from Washington, D.C., Mohammed. First, it's crucial to understand what this is, the use of economic means to achieve political goals. For example, China is using export controls or investment restrictions to punish countries for following a policy countering Beijing's wishes. Or in the case of Taiwan, a self-governing island that China considers its own territory, Beijing's economic clout may be why nations forego diplomatic recognition of Taiwan to retain or obtain Chinese investment. The Korean conglomerate Lotte Group says it lost $1.7 billion when Beijing pressured Seoul to reject the deployment of a U.S. defensive weapon system in South Korea in 2017. The Philippines, Australia, Canada, and the United States have also reported similar accusations of economic pressure from Beijing tied to policy decisions. The Wall Street Journal reports that the G7 countries are expected to issue a joint statement condemning China's economic pressure. Beijing says the G7 as a group and Washington alone have long used economic coercion to shape other countries' foreign policy.
Absolutely indeed. Now, one of the other main issues for the G7 economies at this moment is about addressing global inflation and also managing the key interest rates. Now, Biden is reportedly leaving the region early to help the United States avoid a default on its debt. Now, how much of this is actually a part of the conversation in Japan?
Well, the White House says the president's change of plans will not overshadow the G7, but there's no question it's a factor. After all, the global economy is the main concern for these leaders. The IMF has already warned that there will be global implications, particularly on lower-income nations which are already struggling economically, if Washington does not raise the nation's borrowing limit. Biden will be back here in Washington on Monday to continue talks. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy says he'll put a deal to a vote in Congress next week. Now that's important because lawmakers are due to leave town on Friday and they need a decision in place before June 1, when Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says the country could start running out of money to pay its bills without cutting social safety net checks.
Absolutely indeed. Chris, do continue to stay on with this because I want you to weigh in on another important aspect as to what is happening in the geopolitics in East Asia, where Philippine lawmakers, interestingly, are considering to make introductory military training mandatory for all college and university students. Now, this is a proposal that has sparked a lot of controversy. Dave Gronebaum of Voice of America gets you the story from Quezon City.
At the University of the Philippines, Diliman in Quezon City, these cadets of the Reserve Officer Training Corps, or ROTC, follow commands. Although these students volunteered for the military training, Philippine lawmakers are considering making ROTC mandatory for all university and college students nationwide. The proposal is getting mixed reviews on campuses.
Yes, I do agree in a mandatory ROTC to be implemented in this country.
I do not support this because I believe that the student's choice is highly important.
To earn a bachelor's degree from any school in the Philippines, students must fulfill a national service requirement. 2 semesters of ROTC training once a week is one way. Other options include tutoring children from impoverished communities.
Honestly, I think it's a good thing to have a national service requirement.
Iris Santos, an engineering major at the University of the Philippines, met the requirement with ROTC. She values the training, but does not think it should be made mandatory.
Because I think we have different skills that we can contribute to our nation other than ROTC, because I think the military is not for everybody.
While the proposed law would not require full-time duty, cadets who complete the mandatory 4 semesters of ROTC could be called to active service during emergencies such as war or natural disaster.
This will help us in different circumstances like typhoon, the things that we are needing in those situations will be prepared.
The Department of National Defense did not respond to VOA's questions about how much the mandatory training would cost. Local media says if the measure becomes law, it will cost about $1 billion over 4 years to implement. Critics say this money would be better spent elsewhere.
We want classrooms, we want books, we want more fundings for teachers, we want more student welfare and overall care for us, and that's not being given to us through MROTC.
So the debate continues about whether students in the Philippines should be required to join the ranks. Dave Grunebaum for VOA News, Quezon City, Philippines.
All right, now Voice of America's Chris Casquio is still with us. Now, Chris, what is interesting is that these moves in Manila are all a part of an effort to try and counter China's growing assertiveness in the region, particularly around the Taiwan Strait. And also, the American Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has updated the Congress this week on the American budget to assist Taiwan. What more do we learn from here?
Well, during testimony on Capitol Hill before the Senate Appropriations Committee, Secretary Austin said that Washington can, quote, soon provide security assistance to Taiwan through the presidential authority Congress passed last year. Taiwan's defense chief says talks are underway to send $500 million in weapons from the U.S. stockpiles to Taipei, most likely missiles. Now, this is the same approach Washington is using to help arm Ukraine for its fight against Russia. Austin says budget cuts or a delay in passing the budget he's requested could impact arms production and sales to U.S. allies. But he did not address why he didn't ask for more funds to build the ships the Navy has requested to deter China in the region.
Absolutely, indeed. Now, while we're talking about deterring China in the region, what is also interesting is that China is expanding or trying to expand its role as a mediator. Now, Beijing has sent an envoy to Kiev this week to work on a peace plan between Ukraine and Russia. So how is Washington viewing all this?
We've definitely seen Washington warm to the idea of China playing a constructive role in charting a path towards peace there. While China has outlined a written peace plan and says it supports the principle of sovereignty and territorial integrity, it still has not overtly acknowledged that Russia violated that principle by invading Ukraine. That's something that the U.S. would like to see. This week, Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba told Beijing's envoy Li Hui that Kyiv will not give up territory to Russia as a condition for peace. That's been Washington's position as well. Both Kyiv and Washington have been grateful, though, for China's role in keeping Ukrainian grain exports going. China has purchased a quarter of the grain exports unlocked under the Black Sea Initiative. And they're also grateful for its efforts to ensure the safety of Ukraine's nuclear power plants. Mohammed?
Absolutely, indeed. Mr. Nick Cascio, thank you very much indeed for joining us and getting us all those insights there.